We are now live.
Oh,
Awesome.
Okay, cool. So, hey, how y'all doing? Um, I guess as people are just hopping on, we can just talk and introduce ourselves. Um, because yeah, I don't know if everybody knows each other. I know I bet you last year when we did the live. But yeah,
Yeah,
I
haven't.
no
can.
worries.
You want me to introduce myself first?
You can get us started.
Okay. Well, my name is Nia. I am a high school coordinator for the Detroit Promise. Started in at the end of August, beginning of September. So I'm definitely enjoying it. Love it here.
And then my name's Felicia Pelto. I work with the State Treasury Office, also known as My Student Aid, where we manage and distribute scholarships and grants for Michigan eligible students.
And hello, everyone. My name is Christine Rogers. I work with the Detroit Promise, of course, and we're here to go over Michigan Student Aid and what programs are available. And just to get us started, we first like to say, still, the application is open for the Detroit Promise. Students can still apply, 9th through 12th grade students. So if you already applied for the Detroit Promise, tell your brother, your sister, cousin, any of your other family members about the Detroit Promise and have them sign up if they are a 9th through 12th grade student. And also, if you need to know what those next steps are, log into your Detroit Promise profile. If you click on files, you'll be able to see what those next steps are. So, for example, community college students, you need to upload your transcripts, and students who are attending a university, you need to upload your college acceptance letter, your transcript, and if you are planning on attending Michigan State and have below a 3.3, your test scores. So all that information is available, like I said, on your Detroit Promise profile under Files. And from there, I'm actually going to pass it over to Felicia to get us started on Michigan Student Aid.
Thank you so much. So tonight we're going to talk about pretty much the whole financial aid process. So first and foremost, I just want to remind you again, my name is Felicia Pelto. I come from the State of Michigan Treasury Office, also known as My Student Aid. And our goal is always to help make everything when it comes to college accessible, affordable, and attainable. So just to give you a kind of a quick overview of Financial Aid 101, we're going over tonight. We're going to talk about the institutions that hopefully you're considering, which is all of them, types of financial aid, and how the FAFSA is the key to this entire process. Without it, you're essentially leaving all the funds that I'm going to talk about, including the Detroit Promise, on the table, because they all require that you're essentially looking for money, and that's what the FAFSA is that first step. And then state programs, federal and state programs that'll come from the FAFSA, or in terms of you completing it, that you'll be considered for. MISSG, which is our student portal, and then scholarships, those scholarship guide that I can share with you, and then of course Q&A at the end if you have any. So I'll go ahead and get started. So of course there's three main types of college that you should be considering. First and foremost is going to be your community colleges. Then there's going to be your public colleges and universities, as well as your private colleges and universities, right? Let me go ahead and get my little laser pointer so you can kind of see that a little better. But the main thing, one of the first things I want to bring your eyes to is the average COA, or cost of attendance. So that average cost of attendance, also known as student budget, they'll use those words interchangeably, but this is the average cost to attend that institution. And you'll notice that it kind of increases based on the different types of the institution. So the community college, of course, is going to be the, I don't want to say cheap, because somehow that gives it lesser value, even though the value is just as strong as the other two types of institution. But it has the words community in it, and that's where it's really about affordability. And so the average cost of attendance, all three of these are based on an academic school year, no different than what you've experienced on your own K through 12. You've typically started school August, September, and you'll go, that's through December until Christmas break. That's your fall semester. And then you've got your spring or winter semester, which starts back up in January and goes until May or June. And so that's what the time period is in terms of how this costs. And that average cost is including things like tuition and fees, if such a place has it, room and board. Typically your community college doesn't, but your public and private institutions do. I know Jackson College is one of those colleges within the state of Michigan that has housing and food plans. So that might be one that, kind of skews this on the higher end. But then typically you're looking at transportation costs potentially if it's a commuter type school, which a community college is. Some schools that are public or private, you might live near. So maybe you don't live on campus and you decide to drive, as well as personal miscellaneous expenses. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. But typically when you're looking at your community college, you're looking at anything that's a 2-year or less kind of degree. So certificates, licenses, or associate degrees. And so, like I said, generally 2-year. Public colleges and universities, as well as private. Some of them, rarely, but some do have associate, certificate, or licensing degrees that 2-year or less. But the reason that's important is going to be in some specific state aid opportunities I'm going to talk about, where you really want to pay attention to that certificate or associate's degree. But usually it's bachelor's degree, 4-year degrees or higher. So 4 years, your bachelor's, your graduate, your doctorate, PhD, things like that. Private college or university, the difference between public and private is that, especially as a Michigan resident, if you stay in Michigan, you're going to get a discount going to your public colleges and universities, versus if you're an out-of-state student, it's going to be very similar to this private college cost. However, a private college or university, it's usually a one-size-fits-all, and I mean that in price. So, no matter if you're in-state, out-of-state, they're going to charge that one price and everyone's going to pay the same price. Whereas if you go to a public institution, you'll notice that tuition is probably about 3 times more than the in-district or residential student that lives in that state. So definitely consider all 3, but typically, kind of progressively going from your community college on up and transferring is always going to be the most fiscally responsible. And then this slide here is just more so to give you some idea on the value of a degree. So when it comes to the Federal Bureau of Labor and Statistics, they share with us here that essentially the more educated you are, the higher your weekly salary could potentially be, and the less likely you are to be unemployed. And so that's essentially, some of those benefits of getting a college degree. So when it comes to the different types of financial aid,
Can we go back to that?
Go back to which one?
I was just saying, can we go back to that? Yeah, and just hold it there for 1 second, just so we can make sure that people are able to see that. I think that's very important for students to understand, the value of going to college and why they should get a degree.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Just the value of seeing that, the more educated you are, the more you can anticipate earning. I know that was something I definitely was motivated by.
Yes.
I think we're all motivated. Yeah. You want to know that your livelihood, can be sustainable, essentially. That you can take care of yourself. You won't need to lean on family or friends, that you can afford to do things, even the simpler things in life. And then that unemployment rate, you notice it kind of goes from 11% if you have less than a high school diploma, all the way up to a bachelor's degree, which drops down to 5%. And I will say too, trades, because I know trades have been a big conversation in terms of, for lack of a better word, somewhat devaluing a college education, right? They say, go to a trade, do a trade. And me and a colleague were actually talking about that the other day, that trades are great, but, a lot of people don't understand the language behind a trade. Like, for example, we talked about an electrician, for example, they have to go through journeyman, they have to essentially be an apprentice. They have to go through school for so long. I don't know exactly those numbers, but they have to go through school for so long, or some kind of training, and then they do an apprenticeship, and then eventually they become a master electrician, or what they call also a journeyman. And that takes someone like 7 years before they're no longer under someone's wing. And when you consider that, that's the equivalent of getting your master's or starting to work on a doctorate program, when you really think about it, because an associate's is like 2 years, a bachelor's is 4 years. An average master's degree is an additional 2 years, right? So that's already 4, 5, 6 years. And then maybe somebody starting on their PhD, right, is getting into that 7th or 8th year. So even when it comes to trade, you don't realize it, but you're investing a lot of time in that trade, time and energy. And it may not be that you're necessarily investing, by going to classes, but you're under someone that still has to get you trained, and you still have to get certain certifications and pass certain tests. And so it's not something you can just kind of like walk in 1 year, you're done, and walk out and hey, I'm a journeyman, you know.
I will
So
say
it's
that,
very similar in that aspect.
yeah. I will say on that note, for people that are on this live that are interested in a skilled trade, that if that skilled trade is offered at one of our community colleges, you can use the Detroit Promise to pursue that skilled trade. I know some students think, you only have to get an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree, but Detroit Promise does offer that pathway for students who are pursuing a skilled trade.
Yeah, and I love that you brought that up because I do often remind students that community colleges are probably one of your best areas to go to for a trade because of the fact that they're accredited by certain accreditation bodies that allow for federal, state, and foundational types of financial aid. Whereas when you go to a private trade school, that isn't associated with those accreditations, they cut off all opportunities to receive different forms of financial aid. So a lot of community colleges are filling that gap now. So you can definitely go get a trade and be successful. And then if you want to, be a business professional, learn how to own your own business and things like that, that kind of continues your journey and gives you those benefits of having that additional degree, such as a certificate or associates in business or whatever it is you may want to do.
Thank you for that important information.
Of course. And then, of course, I want to talk about types of financial aid. So I break it down into 3 specific types. There's free money, earned money, and borrowed money. And of course, the first 2 are the best, right? Free and earned. But I do have to talk about borrowed because if I don't, then it's like letting you walk out uneducated, into the world. And so I got to make sure that there's all forms of financial aid, good, bad, and ugly. And so free money, of course, are those scholarships. Scholarships, even though I have on here merit-based, as we know with Detroit Promise, there is a merit-based aspect with it, as well as a residential aspect, right? And other requirements that have to do with you being successfully given that money. But we also know that there's athleticism scholarships, there's identity-based scholarships, I like to say. So for example, if you're a senior in high school right now, there's scholarships specifically for you as a senior. So this is the only year you're eligible as a senior in high school for those scholarships. And that pattern continues as a freshman in college, sophomore in college, junior in college, etc. Maybe you're going even into a specific field or a specific degree. There's going to be scholarships that are specific to that degree or program you're pursuing. Or if there's a rarity, like maybe you're a man in a predominantly female field or the reverse, a woman in a predominantly male-driven field. Sometimes there's scholarships for that identity as well. Grants, of course, are considered need-based and typically come from the FAFSA. And so need-based has to do with that income component, and that's looking at, the information that you placed in the FAFSA. Then there's earned money, which is work study. So I don't know about you, but I was a student that planned on working while in college. And so if you're thinking about that, work study is definitely going to be an option for you. And it's essentially part-time employment to help you pay for college expenses. And I will talk a little more about it later because it does have its own slide. And then borrowed money, as I mentioned, are loans. So student loans are those things that will show up in a financial aid award, especially if that cost of attendance I mentioned earlier is large, unfortunately. And let's say you get grants and scholarships, combination of work study, and it's not enough, then they are going to suggest or offer to you student loans. And what I want you to know is loans do have to be repaid with interest and that you have the power to accept or decline a student loan. And so the main other thing I want you to consider is whether or not you'll earn enough money after college to pay that loan off and be able to manage that debt. Because in reality, I always say, loans are a part of our world. Most people purchase houses with mortgages, which are loans. We purchase cars with loans. So, it just makes sense that college is going to bring it up. It's going to say, hey, you want to invest in your education? There's loans. But making sure that you're knowledgeable and empowered with that knowledge on whether or not it's an option for you, the different kinds that exist. And like I said, the good, bad, and ugly of them. So there are 4 main sources of financial aid. There's going to be your federal government, the state government, which is where I hail from, the institutions and colleges themselves, such as the universities, And then private or third party, which is kind of where Detroit Promise would fall in. So I say associations, foundations, clubs, employers, churches, unions. I know like golf clubs, have been very common for the Evans Scholarship for students that decide to be caddies for their last couple of years in high school. So I say anywhere there's money exchanged, anywhere you're aware of a place being a place of business or an institution, I would inquire, hey, do you guys have a scholarship? Because just from personal experience, I know my stepmom worked at a place for years before I was even born. And someone suggested the same to me. And she went to her HR office, asked if they had a scholarship. One day she drops a scholarship application on the dinner table. And she says, I never knew this place had a scholarship. And even today, they don't advertise it. And so I always say the best kept secret is the one you never ask about and you don't know about. But if you ask about it and you know about it, and you're one of the few that get that opportunity to kind of cash in on it. And then there's the FAFSA. Yeah. So the FAFSA, which is the free application for federal student aid. Now this FAFSA is something you have to complete every single year. But first and foremost, you want to make sure you create and register an FSA ID, which is a federal student aid ID. As a student, most students are naturally a dependent student, which means that, they're living at home with their parents and their parents are providing their household, the house that they live in and such and such. And so the student, you are the driver of that FAFSA. It's your FAFSA since you're going to school. So just like how you guys have your own unique name, social security number, and date of birth, you have to have your own unique FSA ID, you and your parent, at least one of your parents, to create this FSA ID. Now, you do typically have to have a social security number in order to have something for the Social Security Administration to link to and verify. Unfortunately, if you don't have a social security number, you or your parent, you're not able to create an FSA ID. And that's when you'd want to reach out to federal student aid to look at alternate opportunities or alternate ways to complete the FAFSA. And that's assuming that you are, an eligible non-resident or an eligible non-resident essentially. But assuming all is good, you've got a social security number, date of birth, name, of course, then you created that FSA ID, then you'd actually go on and go to FAFSA.gov and create your FAFSA. And so you'd start here, click there, you'd click sign in with your FSA ID. And as the student, you will be driving. It's going to ask you tons of information. It's going to automatically import a lot of the information that it needs, which was asked also when you created your FSA ID. So I would highly, highly suggest creating that FSA ID just because it prevents mistakes like accidentally typing in your social security wrong. Because, when you're going fast and you're typing stuff in, it's easy to fat finger. But if you type in your username and password, that makes it easy because it'll automatically import that social security number and date of birth. So you can't make that mistake. And then, like I said, it'll auto import a lot of other information about you, such as your address, your driver's license, etc. And then at some point, it's going to ask parental information. And it's just one section where it's asking about their income, and their name, and of course, information like that, but to verify their identity. But if you do get lost, stuck, confused, one resource is your school's financial aid office. They can definitely help you, especially if you have unique situations that you want considered, which I'll talk a little bit about more in a minute. But if you're just completing the FAFSA and you just want some support or some assistance, this is the Federal Student Aid Support Hotline. So they're customer service people who are able to assist you and walk you through the FAFSA if you need that sort of help. And they have great hours when you look here. It's Monday through Friday, 8 to midnight, Saturdays, 8 to 5, and then Sundays, noon to 6. So as you can see here, plenty of times. And the number is very easy, 1-800-4FED, 4FED-AID, or this, it's the same thing, but 1-800-433-3243. So some quick facts about the FAFSA. Oh, my apologies, went one click too many. But FAFSA can be completed, and I would say even should be completed online. I don't think they have any more paper forms, or if they do, they send it specifically to you. But to do a paper form, it typically takes like 8 to 16 weeks in terms of going back and forth to complete that. Whereas when you complete it online, you get an almost immediate response. And then within 3 to 5 business days, that information is sent to the schools you identified and all of the kind of third parties that need to be informed of any institutional, departmental, statewide, or Detroit Promise kind of scholarships. Those places can access and know and confirm that you've completed your FAFSA within usually a week or two. Whereas, like I said, if you do it paper, it takes that much longer. The FAFSA is free. So FAFSA stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. And so if anyone is trying to get you to pay for it, you know you are on the wrong website, okay? So get away from that website. For every year you're in college, you do have to complete the FAFSA. And so also keep that in mind, because I've had students over the years who forgot about it. And then, if you think about it, you're currently going to be right now, you're going to be in the middle of school and you're going to completely forget. And this is the time it needs to be completed, because this is also the time scholarship opportunities open up institutionally and otherwise, if you have renewal scholarships and things like that. So this is the time you need to be looking for money, in addition to paying attention to your college classes and studying and doing all of that. So I always say to students, please, please, please put in your phone, back in my day it was planners, but put in your phone October 1, complete the FAFSA, search out scholarships, reapply for scholarships. Just to remind yourself, and put it on a weekly reminder for yourself to do these activities so that you don't miss out on money. Because essentially, if you think about it, you're completing this a year early. If you forget about it and you're, let's say, in your sophomore year, just realizing that you have to do your FAFSA, you're already late. And so that means you could have missed out on a ton of opportunities that would have otherwise been there for you. When it comes to the state of Michigan, our deadline for our scholarships are March 1st. So completing it this October, for example, and every October after, we're looking at the March coming up this next year. So you're way ahead of the game if you get it done now or before Christmas, is what I always say. Get it done before Christmas. It's like a gift to yourself. And then improvements that have been made to the FAFSA is that you can do IRS data retrieval. And so what this does is it allows the FAFSA information to be directly imported, or not the FAFSA, but the IRS tax information to be directly imported into the FAFSA utilizing your FSA ID. So if you're a working student and you file taxes, it'll allow that to be imported directly, as well as if your parents file taxes, assuming that they do, it'll be imported directly. The only issues that may occur is if your parents file separate taxes, then unfortunately they will not be able to use the tool, because they will have to manually input and add their stuff together line by line. So you'll want to make sure that you can add, you can put that stuff in there without any trouble. So figuring out if your parents file joint or separate. If it's joint, good to go. If it's separate, but they're married, they will have to add their stuff together and they won't be able to utilize the tool. But if you are trying to utilize the tool and you're eligible to utilize it, you do have to make sure your address is correct based on the last filed tax return. So if you may have moved, let's say this year, but last year you were at a different address, they're asking for the address on that tax return as a safety precaution to make sure that you're not some scammer or somebody trying to collect information or get free money, right, off of your FAFSA through financial aid, even though you may not be going to school. So putting that information exactly as you typed it, if you abbreviated street, put a period, no period, that's what they're looking for to make sure that it's you, because you should know how you typed in that information or how your tax provider even typed it in. So assuming you get done with the FAFSA, all is good and gravy, then you're going to get something known as this estimated family contribution. And the government's not always great with words, because the estimated family contribution, it doesn't mean that that's the amount that your family has to pay towards college. That's not what it means. But it's just a number that the government provides for schools and institutions to determine the type of financial for. Okay. And the things that impact that EFC are student and parent income, family household size, number in college, as well as the amount of money paid in taxes. so, of course, I do get questions about students wanting to be, independent. Like, you're going to be maybe not living at home. Maybe, like I said, you already file your own taxes. So you're like, Psh, I'm going to be working. I'm going to be doing my own thing. I know when I was your age, I definitely felt that way. I was like, I bought my own car. I'm paying my own insurance. I'm an adult. I'm independent. I don't need my mom's information. Well, unfortunately, the government is very clear because they're looking at situations not related to tax return status, where you're living during the academic year. They're looking for other situations like, are you at least 24 or older, married, have kids or dependents other than your spouse, in graduate school or professional school, are a veteran, a member of the armed forces, experienced time in foster care, became an emancipated minor, at risk of being without housing, or have some other situation that you would want to talk to the financial aid office to provide documentation for. And when you think about it, all of these situations are documentable, right? Your birth certificate would tell us how old you are. You typically would get a marriage license or have birth certificates of children or dependents other than, and etc. There's always some kind of document. But these situations, if you can answer yes to one of them, they consider you independent. If you answer no to all of these situations, then the government says you're a dependent student and it does require parental information. So then you might be wondering, what parents' information do I put on the FAFSA? So naturally, if both parents, you've got both parents in your household, they're living together, they're married, you would need to put both parents' info in. But as I mentioned earlier, you only need one parent to complete the FAFSA with you. So I often jokingly say, pick the most patient parent if you can, the one that's willing to go through this every year with you, and the one that, can collect this tax information so that it's just easy, So whoever's the most easygoing and you want to work with every year on this, pick that parent. Otherwise, if your parents are legally separated or divorced, you're going to pick that parent naturally that you have a relationship with, and that's your custodial parent, the parent that has custody over you. So naturally, it's only going to be that parent. But I know sometimes I've been asked too, my parents are legally separated or divorced. It's a 50-50 split in terms of time. Who do I pick? The government's very specific, and they say because there's 365 days in the year, that's an odd number. There's somebody who has the kid one more day than the other one. That's the one you pick. Okay. If your parent, let's say you have just one parent, and that custodial parent has you pretty much 90 or more % of the time, and they end up getting remarried to a step parent, you do have to include your parent and that step parent's information, because in the eyes of the government, once they got married, they are now your household. So they have to provide both parents information, even though they're a step parent. It may have just entered your life. Unfortunately, they're like, tax-wise, that's your household. If your parents were never married and not living together, naturally, it's going to be whoever you live with. And then if your parents were never married but living together, so in the eyes of the world, they're kind of married, right? Common law marriage. Everyone assumes they're married, even though they've probably not really tied the knot. In the eyes of the government, they're telling you to use both parents' info. So then I mentioned earlier that you might have a circumstance that isn't necessarily listed that you think would qualify for independent status. That's something called professional judgment in a financial aid office. And it's when you have a special circumstance that allows the financial aid office to reevaluate your financial aid package. Now, there are some specific situations where that's kind of automatic, but you do still need to let them know and provide documentation so they can do it. It's going to be change of income naturally, right? Usually you'll have something to prove that. Change in household size. So if a divorce happened, right, naturally that would be change in income, change in household size. Maybe you have some siblings that are no longer there anymore. That's going to change a lot of that information. And then, as I mentioned, as a dependency override. So if you think, hey, this situation should make me independent. Some situations that the government automatically considers are abuse or neglect. If you're at risk of being without housing or homeless, or as I mentioned too, if there's some other situation that you feel like that you have documentation on that you want to provide for them to consider, they will do that. But again, it's not based on financial reliance, your tax filing status, or academic term residency, meaning where you're living during the academic year, that qualifies you necessarily for dependency override. Because in the eyes of the government, you're only gone for those 9 months. Assumptively, you're going home after, college to take a break and then go back the following year. So assuming you get through all that hoopla, right? All that stuff regarding the FAFSA, these are the different federal student aid programs you'd be considered for. So there's the federal Pell Grant, which is the largest federal grant, which I'll talk a little bit more about. The Federal Supplemental Education Opportunity Grant, which you might see on your award letter as FSEOG. This one is a first come, first serve situation. So based on my experience, I would say, as I mentioned, get your FAFSA done before Christmas, because this is, as it is, a supplemental education opportunity grant from the federal government. They disperse a certain amount to every school, and it's a limited amount. So typically what schools will do is they'll look at FAFSA completion date to determine who should get this first. And then they may have other criteria such as that EFC. But if they're looking at first come, first serve, usually in my experience, I've seen it get depleted as early as Christmas or just after the new year when it comes to FAFSA completion. So that's why I kind of suggested get it done before Christmas, because then you're in that first come, first serve qualification of earliest eligibility for stuff, especially this supplemental opportunity. Then there's that federal work study, which again, I'm going to talk more about on its own slide. If anyone's thinking about being a teacher, there's this Teacher Education Assistance for Higher Education grant. They also call it TEACH grant. I doubt any of you have served in Iraq or Afghanistan, but that's what this grant is about. It's a service grant. And then there's the federal direct subsidized, unsubsidized, and direct plus loans. So everything with loan does have to be repaid with interest. Everything else is a grant going up. Even this work study is a federal grant, and those do not have to be repaid. So just wanting to share, because the federal Pell Grant is the largest grant, the largest federal grant, I should say. To be considered, again, you have to do the FAFSA. And what we do know is that families that make $27,000 or less automatically receive what's known as a zero EFC. Zero means that they're eligible for the maximum amount of Pell Grant. For this current year, not the year you're going to go to school, which is next year, but this year, students currently going to school, the FAFSA or the Pell Grant provides $68.95. Now, this amount is in alignment with the cost of attendance and student budgets I mentioned earlier. So this is based on full time, like those cost of attendances were. And this is based on those 2 semesters I mentioned, fall and winter. So this would be divided in half. And part of the reason we like to talk about this too is just to kind of make everyone aware that, when you think about it, even the poorest of us, right, like $27,000 per year, zero EFC, meaning, you have nothing that your family could potentially contribute. This $68.95 wouldn't even help cover the average community college costs when you think about it, right? So I always like to remind students that you're never going to get a full ride from one resource. I mean, it happens. It can happen. I'm not saying it doesn't, but it's usually not one resource by itself alone. You have to stack, right? You got to look at federal, state, institutions, private organizations, or third parties, and you got to stack those opportunities to cover yourself. It's usually not going to be just one place that covers everything all at once. And so that's where everyone, even the poorest of us, have to put some skin in the game to make sure that, we're covering ourselves and that we're getting multiple opportunities. Because if you think back, the cheapest, I shouldn't say the cheapest, but that community college number was around 18,000, and this is around 6. Right? We can round up to 7, but that means that there's still a significant gap when it comes to the remaining cost of attendance. And so if we want to fully cover that, we want to look for other opportunities. So then there's that federal work study. Every school and college kind of determines the maximum amount a student can receive. But at the end of the day, the maximum you can work is 20 hours. And while that may seem like, what, that's crazy, or that's not enough, because you might be a student that works a lot, when you're going to school full time, That is full time. As I said, full time. Full time credits is usually 12 hours. And the assumption academically is that for every hour you're in school, you're spending 3 of those studying and prepping to gain mastery over that subject. So when you think about 12 times 3, that's 36 plus 12, that's getting you to that 40 or 32. Sorry, 12. Yeah, 36. Oh, no. Yeah, it's 40. So that's getting you to those 40 hours. So if you think about those 40 hours plus an additional 20 work hours, that's 60 hours. You know what I mean? And that is an average working schedule for a person. Sometimes you're working a little more, a little less. And it's also based on the mastery of your work. You know, somebody that's been in their job for a very long time, it may not take them a full 40 hours or 60 hours a week to accomplish all of their work. But when you're first starting out, it typically does. So you want to be mindful of that. And the great thing about work study is that it makes you marketable to the institution. And what I mean by that is that the government subsidizes some of your wage. So maybe you got an opportunity that is $16 an hour. 10 of it may come from work study and $6 of it may come from that office's budget. And so that's what makes you more marketable, because they're not having to spend all of their budget or a big majority of it on your student wage. In addition to that, even though you'll count this as income on your FAFSA, there's another line area where you put need-based employment, which is what this is considered. And so it'll actually cancel out the income that you're reporting, at least the equivalent of the work study, because the government doesn't want to count the assistance that they're providing you. And so, but it's still a job like any other job. You're still responsible for seeking out, applying for, interviewing, being offered, accepting the position, and treating it like a job, right? This is still a resume building opportunity. You could still get into areas of work that are related to your studies. You could get that early step up on your resume as an opportunity to allow you to, go further in your career and faster than someone who doesn't work while in school. And this also, go ahead.
I was just going to say, yeah, I did work study programs when I was in college, and there were a variety of different jobs, whether or not it was like working for a community or working, doing research with a professor. There were even research opportunities to work in the library. If you wanted in the dining hall, there's so many different opportunities to work on campus. So they're not always, like the jobs that students, quote unquote, wouldn't want to do, like working in the dining hall. There, like you said, opportunities for you to actually get like experiences and add to your resume.
Yes. And I can say too, I was a work study student as well. And so it's just funny because I worked in student services as a work study student. So, think about it, fast forward now, I'm still doing that kind of work when you think about it, which gave me those opportunities. So it's just funny. You never know where work study will take you, but it's still a great opportunity. And I'll also say too, it's probably the best job you'll ever have while you're in college, simply because they know that you're a student and that comes first. So if you fail out of school, you're no use to them. They can't keep you as an employee, technically. So they are going to be just as strong of a cheerleader for you in school as you should be for yourself, sometimes more.
Most definitely.
Yeah. And so this is also an opportunity for you to get a paycheck as a student, because it will show up on your award letter, but it's not an advance payment towards your bill, and it doesn't apply to your student balance, just so you guys know that. You're going to get it as a paycheck as you earn and work those hours, and then you will be able to pay any remaining tuition or fees or campus charges, room and board, get any books and supplies you might need, or use it for personal miscellaneous expenses such as transportation. If you're truly off on campus somewhere, you never know. Maybe you need new toothbrush, underwear, just some of those basic needs that we all will need at some point. You can use this money to assist you with that. And then federal student loans, like I said, I know it's one of those things that we don't want to talk about, but they're a reality of the world. And to me also, if you understand how federal student loans go, you're less likely to make mistakes in the future when it comes with credit cards, buying a car, getting a house, things like that, because this is kind of that early exposure on some level, which I would say don't get credit cards in college because, you don't need them yet. But subsidized and unsubsidized loans. So if you do end up having to consider getting loans, unfortunately, I was someone who did have to consider that because I had a scholarship that just disappeared. I didn't understand that it was something that was a one-time opportunity, and I needed to be searching for another opportunity to fill that gap when it disappeared my senior year. So I ended up getting a loan, and I would say if there's a better one that's better than the other, it's going to be the subsidized. And I always say it's because the government subs in for you. They're subbing in terms of interest. So if you borrowed $1,000 today, it's $1,000 until 6 months after you graduate from college or stop going at least half time. Then there's unsubsidized. It's the direct opposite. You know, the government doesn't subsidize the interest for you. So the moment you borrow that $1,000, it's getting interest literally every day on that loan. And then there's something known as the Parent Plus loan. So if you go to a really expensive school and you get your award letter, you're going to see any grants, scholarships, work study, and then subsidized, unsubsidized that you're eligible for it with your name. There's going to be the Parent Plus loan, and they're going to suggest that your parent borrow this remaining difference in the cost of attendance or student budget that isn't covered by everything else. And so this is put in the parent's name, and the parent can never take it out of their name or put it into your name. It's always going to be in their name. And this one is credit based. So based on if the credit of your parent, credit score, right? They're going to offer this. And if your parent applies, I just want to share this detail. If your parent applies and they need a third-party cosigner because, you know, their credit isn't good enough or something, they can actually decline this Parent Plus loan, which would actually increase the amounts of sub and unsub that you could be eligible for as a student, just an FYI. And then I also want to give you some other factors to consider when taking out a loan. Make sure that your monthly loan payment shouldn't exceed or doesn't exceed 10% of your monthly take-home pay your first year. And so you might be wondering, how do I do that? How am I going to know how much I'm making my first year after college? Well, if you know what degree you're going for, you can go to the Federal Bureau of Labor and Statistics, which is BLS.gov, Bureau Labor Statistics, BLS.gov, and they will tell you the average income of that degree or career that you're looking at going into. And so that's where you can estimate how much you could potentially make per month. And so, like I said, make sure that your loan payment is no more than 10% of that monthly take-home pay. So in this example, if somebody knows they're going to get $3,000 a month, make sure that you're not paying any more than $300 a month. Because when you do go to apply for a loan and everything, they do have you do entrance loan counseling where you're estimating how much you'd be paying based on how much you're borrowing. And they have you go through these different activities to figure it out year by year. So if you borrow year one, year two, they're going to include year one, and then you're going to be estimating again, how much is that loan payment changing. So then the other thing I would say is make sure that your loan debt in total doesn't exceed your annual salary that first year you graduate. So for example, if you think that you're going to earn $45,000 in terms of an annual salary, make sure your loans don't go more than $45,000 in total, because ideally, if you're earning $45,000 when you graduate, your income should continue to grow. That loan, as you're making that 10% payment per month, should continue to, be that 10% payment, but the overall balance of that loan will decrease over time while you're continuing to earn more. And the standard repayment plan is 10 years. And so you should have paid it off within 10 years at that point, because once your income is growing, it's up to you if you want to pay more, or you can stay on that standard 10-year payment plan and be done with it. But there are some other options as well. So there is a thing known as public service loan forgiveness. If you end up working for the government, whether it's federal, state, or local, after 10 years of making payments, you could potentially get whatever's still left forgiven. If you're thinking about being a teacher and you decide to work in a high need area, you could get, after 5 years, a certain amount of student loans forgiven. And then if for some reason, let's say you estimated that you were going to make 45,000, but you ended up only coming out and making, let's say 38,000. And that's actually, so you borrowed more unexpectedly and are earning less, you can actually do an income-driven loan repayment plan to help you sustainably live, right? So you're not paying too much to the federal government in terms of loan funds. And I had another thought with that, but essentially, that's them being helpful because sometimes students will consider private loans. That's my thought coming back, is sometimes students will consider private loans. And I say private loans are no different than credit cards. If they're struggling, they don't care if you're struggling. They want their money because they've got to survive, right? So they don't care if they're hurting your credit score and all that kind of stuff. Whereas the government, if you talk to them, they will help you. They will always help you if you talk to them. If you don't talk to them, naturally, how can they help? They don't know anything's wrong. So be verbal and communicate with your servicer when you're done with school if you end up borrowing. All right, so then now I want to talk about my Office of Student Scholarships, Grants, and Outreach. So my office was able to appropriate over $220 million for 7 different state financial aid programs, all of which are for undergraduate students, and most are need-based. And you can check out our website here at michigan.gov/MyStudentAid for program details, eligibility requirements, as well as our different fact sheets about the different programs. And then these are the different state aid programs that we offer. So there's Children of Veterans Tuition Grant. So if you are the student of a veteran or that passed away or became disabled in the line of duty, you could get a scholarship. If you're a student that experienced foster care, Fostering Future Scholarship, you may be eligible for that. There's the Michigan Competitive Scholarship, which is also, as I mentioned, most are need-based. So assuming you have need determined by the FAFSA and you've received a 1,200 or higher SAT score, then you could be eligible for that. And this is for public institutions. The Michigan Tuition Grant is kind of the sister of the Michigan Competitive Scholarship, where it's for private independent institutions. The Police Officer and Firefighter Survivor Tuition Grant is similar to the Veterans Tuition Grant in that if your parent passed away in the line of duty as a police officer or firefighter, you could be eligible for that grant. There's the Tuition Incentive Program, which is our largest state program, and I'll end up talking about that in some detail. The Michigan Reconnect Program is actually not for students. It's for students 25 and older. So if you have parents, cousins, uncles, aunties, anyone who hasn't gotten their associates or bachelor's or certificate yet, they may be eligible for this Michigan Reconnect Scholarship. And then there's the Michigan Achievement Scholarship, which I'll talk about also on its own slide. But to be eligible for all of our different grants and scholarships, you do have to have Michigan residency, be a U.S. citizen, permanent resident, or approved refugee, complete that FAFSA, use it at an approved Michigan college or university, which means it does not follow you out of state. You have to be in state in order to receive it. You do have to enroll at least half-time. And for those considering Michigan Reconnect, it doesn't matter if they're in default for a federal loan, they could still get that program. And then you do have to get your high school diploma, certificate of completion, or its recognized equivalent, as well as meet satisfactory academic progress at the institution standards, which you're not unfamiliar with. As a student, in order to get your high school diploma, you've had to take a certain diversity of classes. So you have to do that with your degree in college. Make sure you're taking those specific college courses and don't veer off course. You have to make sure that you are getting a certain GPA level in those courses in order for them to count, right? So you want to make sure that you're getting the qualifying GPA in order to maintain and sustain your to have that class count towards your degree. As well as if you're having trouble, make sure to talk to your professor as well as any financial aid office or academic advisor to ensure that if for some reason you don't pass that class, what will the consequences be? Because essentially, if you do all of the reverse of those things, you are putting your financial aid in jeopardy, as well as you have that potential of getting suspended from that school or dismissed. So make sure that you're following those satisfactory academic progress standards at that institution. All right. And then I mentioned earlier that there was the FAFSA deadline of March 1st. Now that's more specific to our Michigan Competitive and Michigan Tuition Grant, but regardless, they require the FAFSA. And the way that we know where to send any money you're eligible for is based on the first Michigan college you list on your FAFSA. That's where we're going to intuitively send that money. But if for some reason you don't end up going to that Michigan college or university, there's 3 ways you can change that. You can update your FAFSA school order and let us know. You can create a student portal, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Or you can contact our customer care center, and they too will update that information for you. And this information, this phone number and our contact information will be at the very end of the presentation too. So you can always take a screenshot as well once I get there. And there's that Michigan Achievement Scholarship I mentioned earlier. So this was signed into law essentially October 11th. And this Michigan Achievement Scholarship is starting with your class. If you're a senior this year, you're going to be the first eligible to be able to get this scholarship. And based on what school you go to depends on, or the type of school, I should say, depends on how much you get. So if you go to your community college, you get $2,750 per year or up to. If you go to your public college or university, you can get up to $5,500. And if you decide to go to a private or independent college or university, you can get up to $4,000. And all it requires is that you complete your FAFSA, of course, so then we can see if your EFC is $25,000 or less. And if it is, you would be one of those students eligible. But you do want to create your portal, which I'll talk about here in a bit. But I want to talk about the tuition incentive program because, as I mentioned, this is our largest program. And students that are eligible for this are students that received Michigan Medicaid for 24 out of 36 month period. So 2 out of 3 years between the ages of 9 and high school graduation. And we get a list actually this month, every November, to tell us from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services who's eligible for this opportunity. There's no scholarship or no application required, I should say, because you're identified through the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. But to remain eligible, you want to make sure you graduate from high school before the age of 20. If you decide to go to early or middle college, make sure you graduate before the age of 21. Begin using your benefits after graduation within 4 years. So you've got 4 years after graduation to figure it out. And what I mean is take a couple classes. Once you've taken a couple classes, that actually extends your benefits for 10 years before the benefits are forfeited. And there's 2 phases to TIP. Phase 1 is, oh, go ahead.
I'm just trying to make sure. So they have up until 4 years to use it after they graduate, and then once they use it, they have up until 10 years to use those funds.
Yep, it expands it an additional 10 years.
Okay,
isn't that crazy? I'm like, that's awesome. It used to be only 6, but now we expanded.
As long as they take a class and start using it within those 4 years, they're good.
Yep, that expands it. Because they understand, typically, I mean, just considering how students are eligible, for example, right, Medicaid coverage, things happen, right? Students start lives, get pregnant, change jobs, parents get sick, things like that force you to have to stop or take a pause. And so they wanted to extend that opportunity a little longer, especially for, this specific group, just because those life circumstances are more likely to happen statistically, unfortunately, but they're more likely to happen with that population of student, or that identity, I should say. And, even speaking as a student that was a TIP eligible student, I had to take a pause because unfortunately my mother did get sick while going to college. And so I ended up actually having to take at least a 1-year pause in order to kind of bring her back to health.
Yeah, I was TIP eligible, but I didn't find out about it until after that 4-year period, so I wasn't able to use it.
Oh no, yeah. And I'll tell you personally, I didn't know I was TIP eligible either until, and I love her. She's a friend of mine, but she was being nosy, in my opinion. She was like, what'd you get for financial aid? And money is always a weird subject, right? When you're talking to people. But she's like, what's your financial aid look like? And I was just like, and she ends up looking and she goes, okay, well, it looks like ours are pretty much the same, but you're missing TIP. And I was like, what do you mean? And she goes, call this number. So mind you, I'm already past my first year in college. So it's not like I can get that back, but she goes, call this number and ask them if you're eligible for TIP. And same number that I'm offering here. And I call that number and they're like, yep, we'll send certification to your school. And it was just like, yeah, so I never knew either, because unfortunately, even though high school counselors get this access, to look and see this stuff, they don't always necessarily ensure that we either stop out or that they inform their students that they're eligible for it, unfortunately. So that's where I'm here. Hopefully, through the knowing of this, that students can kind of look it up themselves at some point and learn that they're eligible. And then if they have questions, reach out to us.
Most definitely.
Yeah. So phase one, we call your certificate and associate degree phase. And so this kind of goes back to when I was talking about types of colleges, because a lot of students commonly will go to their university and they'll get thrown right into a bachelor's degree program. Okay. And if you're put right into a bachelor's degree program, you can't utilize phase one. You're only utilizing phase two at that point. And so that's why sometimes it is best to go to your community college and then transfer, because then you're utilizing the full extent of the program. So with phase one, if you go to your local community college, your in-district community college, we cover that full tuition there and then pay up to $250 in mandatory fees per semester. If you decide to go to a Michigan public university, again, you have to be enrolled in a certificate or associate degree program, because if you're in that bachelor's degree, it doesn't count. So if you're in an associate's degree program, we're going to pay the full cost of that lower level resident rate, which at that point is full tuition, because you'd be billed as a freshman or sophomore anyway. And so we would pay that full freshman, sophomore tuition plus that $250 in mandatory fees. But again, be enrolled in an associate or certificate. And then if you decide to go to your private or independent college or university and you're enrolled in that certificate or associate's degree, we'll pay the average in-district community college rate, which this year is $122 per credit. By the time you go to school next year, that'll probably increase. And we still pay that $250 in mandatory fees. You got to be at least half-time. So when we were talking earlier about take some classes, you got to be at least half-time for us to recognize that you're going to school and for TIP to start counting towards that. As well as if you decide to go towards a certificate, you want to make sure that that certificate is at least 24 credits in total and at least an academic year long. And an academic year is typically a period of at least 30 weeks of instructional time. And then assuming that you take phase one, get your certificate associates, and maybe you decide you're going to go and get that 4-year degree. So you get that 56 transferable credits, or you get that associate's degree, and then you transfer on. Phase two activates once you're a junior. And once you're a junior, you get $500 per semester for those last 2 years, up to $2,000 total. So $2,000 total for those last 2 years. And you do have to complete this within 30 months of completing your phase one requirements. And so as you can see, they want you to continue to pursue. So we give you 10 years to get phase one, but once you finish phase one, we want you to hurry up and finish phase two and get that bachelor's degree. And then MISSG is our student portal. So here you can see, you can go and create that portal by going to michigan.gov/MISSG. And in order to create an account, you need one of two things. You need to either have a TIP record on file. So if you have a TIP record on file, you can go in there right now and create this account. And all you need is your social security number. If you're not a TIP eligible student, it's going to give you an error. And if it gives you that error, it's only because at that point, we don't have a current year FAFSA for you. So that's the one or two things that we need from you. You either need to have a TIP record on file, which we would get from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, or you have to have a current year FAFSA. If you don't have a current year FAFSA and you're not TIP eligible, it will not let you create the portal, okay? Within that portal, you can essentially verify your award status, like what eligibility you have. You can see and receive important information from us, update the college on file that you want us to send any money or eligibility to, check payment status so you can see how much money we've sent what schools, as well as apply for different applications or grants, such as that Children of Veterans, Fostering Futures, or Police and Firefighters Survivors Tuition Grant. From my understanding, the Michigan Achievement Scholarship is supposed to be automatic, but you can still verify eligibility by going into the portal. And then if you go to our website, michigan.gov/MyStudentAid, which I'll show you here at the very end, but click on students and families. That's where you're going to find all the information about these different opportunities, all the publications and detailed program information, scholarship searching best practices. So if you're looking for scholarships other than with us, as well as signing up for that portal. But you can also find our scholarship search tool, which is what this is, our My Scholarship Search. And if you type in the county you live in, it's going to generate a PDF, but you don't have to generate that PDF either. You can actually just pull it up based on your county, and they're all live links to allow you to go straight to that website and apply for that scholarship. Now, if your county does have colleges in it, it will identify those scholarship opportunities as well. But again, I always say, we may have things from banks if they're annual. I even say, find stuff at law offices. Nobody we're necessarily connected with, but just legitimate opportunities that we found. And then, of course, this is the end of the presentation. So if you guys do have questions, as I mentioned earlier, take a screenshot of this so you have our contact info. But before you do, I just want to say thank you for letting me present to you tonight and talk to you about what we offer, federal student aid, all the various opportunities and things you should be thinking about when it comes to college. But of course, I'll leave that up so you guys can take that screenshot now.
Thank you so much for joining us and sharing all of the wonderful information that you shared with our audience today. As you all know, this live will be available for you all to go back and watch again. So if there's any information that you missed, or maybe you want to share it with someone else that you know is navigating the financial aid process, definitely share it with them. If you have any questions, definitely, like I said, screenshot this information. Now, if you have any questions about the Detroit Promise, email us at info@detroitpromise.com, and I'll pull up our email address if I can get it, which I can't fast. But yeah, email us at info@detroitpromise.com, and that's going across the bottom for you all.
Perfect.
Thanks for joining. See you all.
Take care, everybody.